A deafening pulse of static surged through every screen, speaker, and satellite on Earth. Lights flickered. Hearts stopped. Then, through the hiss, a voice emerged, calm, low, and cold as deep space. "They're already here," it said. For a moment, time itself held its breath. Cities fell silent. Crowds stared upward. The sky didn't change, but everything else did. A frequency unlike any ever recorded bled into every channel. Not just a message, an alien intelligence had just tapped into Earth's consciousness. Across monitors and handhelds, the transmission unraveled in layers of symbols and encrypted pulses. But beneath the confusion, a human feeling rose: fear. Chaos ignited like wildfire. Military jets scrambled over trembling cityscapes. Governments locked down communications. But one person standing alone in a cramped apartment in Los Angeles wasn't afraid. They weren't surprised. They had heard this voice before. The protagonist whispered, "We've been waiting for you." The world didn't collapse in a flash. It unraveled, thread by thread. Cities braced for impact that never came. Sirens screamed for hours before falling into eerie silence. Streets emptied as governments told citizens to stay inside, but answers never followed. Panic bred rumors, and rumors bred violence. In the silence, some prayed. Others prepared. The protagonist sat motionless as the screens around them darkened one by one, except the laptop. It stayed on, still decoding. "Why now?" they whispered. They remembered something from their childhood. A symbol, a sound, a dream. This wasn't humanity's first contact. It was the next chapter. Somewhere deep within the protagonist's memories, the voice had already spoken once before. They were never just a civilian. They had been waiting all their life, without knowing it. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew it wouldn't be a war of bullets. It would be a war of truths. In bunkers beneath mountain ranges and satellites orbiting the Earth, world powers convened. Lines of communication that hadn't buzzed since the Cold War were open again. The question wasn't if the signal was real, it was what it meant. No demands, no threats. Just presence. Observers. Watchers. Every intercepted fragment reinforced a chilling idea. We were not being invaded, we were being audited. An evaluation was underway. The protagonist stared at a memory, a photo of their mother, a scientist whose death was ruled an accident. But it wasn't. She had warned them in coded bedtime stories, hiding truths in fairy tales. Now, it all made sense. She had known this day would come. "You tried to tell me," they muttered. Governments were scrambling. The protagonist was remembering. News networks collapsed under conflicting narratives. Some claimed an attack, others said divine intervention. But deep web forums, underground radio, and cracked servers revealed the truth first. The signal wasn't just communication. It was a test, and only some humans could hear it fully. The protagonist saw posts of people describing the same dream, the same voice, the same haunting message: "We've been watching." The world spiraled into disbelief, but the protagonist found clarity. They weren't chosen by accident. They were born into it. Outside, sirens blared again. Helicopters rumbled through the sky. But the real war was inside people's minds, inside the truths long buried. This wasn't the end of the world. It was a reckoning. Outside, the stars seemed to hum. The protagonist stepped onto the rooftop. The city was silent, like the pause before a scream. Above, nothing moved. No ships, no lights. Just stars. And yet, something was different. A pressure. A presence. They closed their eyes and felt it. A wave of consciousness pressing gently against their mind. Not invasive, just there. Testing. Watching. For the first time, the protagonist spoke back, not aloud but within. "I know who I am now," they thought. In that moment, something clicked. A map in their mind. Coordinates. Directions. The war had already begun, but it would not be fought with weapons. It would be fought with knowledge, memory, and the unraveling of every lie Earth had told itself. The next day, the world felt different. Not visibly, not immediately, but people could feel it, in their bones, in their breath. Trust, once fragile, now shattered. The government spoke in calm tones on broadcast channels, claiming the signal was a solar anomaly, a glitch. But no one believed them. Not anymore. Protesters filled streets in silence, holding signs that didn't demand action. They demanded truth. The protagonist watched from a distance, blending into the crowd, feeling the temperature of the world change. "They're lying to all of us," someone whispered beside him. The protagonist didn't respond. They already knew. An internal compass had awakened, pointing towards something buried, something dangerous. The voice hadn't returned since that first night, but its echo hadn't left. If anything, it was growing louder, clearer. The protagonist clenched a note they found under their door. "They're listening. Don't trust your memories." It wasn't signed. But the handwriting. It was their mother's. In the dim privacy of his apartment, the protagonist laid out the note. The handwriting was unmistakable, his mother's loops, her slight right slant, the unique way she crossed her T's. She died 10 years ago in a lab accident, or so they told him. But this was her. He dug out an old notebook she had left behind, blank pages mostly, except for one torn corner she had slipped into the back cover. It matched. Her handwriting, her symbols, a sequence of numbers that suddenly pulsed in his memory like coordinates. He remembered them whispered in her bedtime stories. He thought they were dreams, but now he saw them for what they were, warnings. She had known this day would come, and she had tried to leave him a path. Somewhere out there, someone else knew the truth, and someone else wanted it buried. "Don't trust your memories," the note had said. What if everything he remembered was a lie? The signal hadn't returned, but something else had, dreams. Not fragmented or surreal, but vivid, structured and shared. Across the internet, strangers described the same forest, the same humming sound, the same message. "We are the lens." The protagonist stood in a bookstore's back aisle, reading a banned blog printed on old paper. A retired intelligence analyst had posted once and disappeared. In her final entry, she claimed the signal was activating something biological, ancient code buried in human DNA, passed down for generations. She called them echoes, latent memories that belonged to no one but lived in everyone. And now they were waking up. The protagonist rubbed his temples. For a moment, he could hear the hum. Not outside, but inside. Not sound. Resonance. A frequency only some could feel. "They're not contacting us," he murmured. "They're triggering us." The world's panic shifted into obsession. Governments deployed drones and surveillance AI under the guise of public safety. But the real purpose was fear containment. Anything about the signal was scrubbed online within seconds. Books disappeared. Voices vanished. Truth was being hunted. The protagonist's old university friend, Maya, a cybersecurity analyst, called him in a whisper. "They're rewriting the net in real time," she said. "Digital amnesia. Whole histories wiped clean." She sent him a file, metadata from the original transmission. Hidden in the code were names, coordinates, birth records. His was one of them. His mother's, Maya's, and 100 more. "We're being tracked because we heard it," she said. The protagonist looked around, suddenly aware of every camera, every drone above. "You need to go dark," Maya warned. "They're coming for anyone who can still remember." By morning, Maya was gone. Her apartment empty. Her data erased. Not deleted, obliterated. The protagonist barely escaped surveillance at the train station, blending into a crowd of travelers unaware the world had changed. Beneath the surface of cities, a resistance was forming. Not violent. Not loud. A silent network of those who remembered the transmission, those who felt the dreams. They called themselves the Remembered. And they were not trying to fight the government or the aliens. They were trying to survive long enough to understand what was coming. The protagonist was handed a burner phone at a checkpoint. No name, no explanation. Just one message on screen. You are not alone. For the first time in days, he exhaled. Hope didn't roar. It whispered. But it was there. And it would be enough. For now. The protagonist met them beneath the ruins of an old power station, half buried in weeds and time. The Remember weren't soldiers. They were janitors, teachers, hackers, baristas. But each of them had felt it, heard it, and remembered it. They moved like ghosts, off-grid, off-record. At the center stood an older man named Elias. His voice rasped from years of silence. You've been marked since birth, he told the protagonist. Your mother helped build the first receiver before they silenced her. The words hit like ice. His mother hadn't been an observer, she had been a participant. A rebel. Elias handed over a small scorched device. She made this for you, he said. Before they came. It wasn't a weapon. It was a recorder. A memory key. They don't want to destroy us, Elias added. They want to overwrite us. The real war wasn't against alien ships. It was against forgetting. Against the erasure of everything human. Later that night, Elias led the protagonist to a forgotten server bunker deep beneath the city. There, amid rusted racks and blinking lights, was a living archive, one that the government never found. These are unaltered memories, Elias said. Raw data, pre-signal. Dozens of hard drives spun slowly, connected to ancient machines, housing testimonies from those who vanished, people who claimed they saw too much. Among them, footage of the protagonist's mother. She stood in a lab coat, speaking directly to camera. If my son is seeing this, then the memory lock has failed, she said. You are not who you think you are. You were never just mine. The protagonist's breath caught. The message continued, her eyes full of both sorrow and fire. They're not invading. They're restoring control. Every memory was a battlefield. And now, the protagonist understood, they weren't just uncovering truth. They were the key to stopping the rewrite. The next day brought betrayal. One of the Remembered, a man named Cole, vanished overnight, taking data with him. He left no trace, but he left something else, a recording. In it, Cole stood in the dark, his eyes not quite human anymore. I remember everything now, he said, voice warped. Because I was never one of you. He had been a sleeper agent all along, one of many seeded among the population decades ago. You think you're fighting an invasion, Cole said. But this isn't war. This is correction. The screen shut off. Silence followed. Elias looked shaken. We're compromised, he whispered. The room turned cold, not from temperature, but from fear. If Cole had been one of them, how many more were hiding in plain sight? The protagonist clenched the memory key. They were running out of time. And worse, they were losing control of the truth. The betrayal cracked the group. Paranoia crept in like poison. Trust frayed. Some wanted to scatter. Others wanted to strike back. The protagonist stood in the center, silent. Then he spoke. We don't beat them with fire, he said. We beat them by remembering. It wasn't a speech. It was a revelation. He'd started hearing the voice again, not as sound but as vision. Memories he didn't live through. Lives that weren't his. Waking dreams. A transmission embedded not in tech, but in blood. His blood. Elias nodded slowly. You're the Convergence, he said. They've been watching you since before you were born. The room shifted. Not with fear, but resolve. Then let them watch, the protagonist replied. He wasn't the chosen one. He was the variable. The one thing the rewrite couldn't predict. The glitch in their design. That night, the protagonist couldn't sleep. He walked alone through the silent streets, abandoned cars and flickering streetlights around him. The city was in lockdown, but not empty. Eyes watched from windows, from rooftops. Humanity had gone underground, not physically, but spiritually. Then he saw her, the woman from his dreams, standing beneath a broken streetlight, motionless. Not human. Not entirely. "You've felt it, haven't you?" she asked. Her voice wasn't threatening. It was sad. "You were supposed to forget." He stepped closer. "But I didn't," he said. She tilted her head. "That makes you dangerous." And then she vanished. Into air, into thought, he couldn't tell. He stood there, alone again, but no longer uncertain. He knew what he was now. A weapon not forged in steel, but in memory. The only thing they couldn't fully erase. They found the old research facility buried beneath miles of forest, hidden beneath overgrowth and rust. It had been scrubbed from all maps, sealed and abandoned long ago, another ghost of the past. But the memory key opened its door. Inside, decay clung to every surface. Lab tables were frozen in time. Dust-covered journals lay undisturbed for decades. And in the farthest corner, a sealed archive. It hissed open like a sarcophagus. Inside, data drives, biological samples, a photograph, his mother, younger, standing beside beings not human, not quite alien either. Hybrid integration trials, the folder read. The protagonist backed away, heart hammering. He wasn't just Mark. He was made. His mother hadn't just studied them. She worked with them. And the truth rippled like thunder. He was part of whatever they were. Not just a memory carrier. A bridge between species. The data inside the archive wasn't encrypted. It was protected by memory. The protagonist had to physically touch the device. As he did, visions cascaded through him, flashes of lab rooms, alien languages, voices whispering in frequencies too low for human ears. But they weren't unfamiliar. They felt inherited. A presence awakened inside him, not an entity but a pattern. One that had always been there, dormant. Elias watched in stunned silence as the protagonist translated glyphs without realizing it. This isn't language," he whispered. "It's DNA." What they had taken from his mother wasn't just her life. It was the template. The protagonist wasn't just linked to the truth. He was born from it. Created as a message encoded in flesh and memory. Not chosen by fate, designed for purpose. The facility wasn't abandoned. It had been quarantined. Motion sensors tripped. Red lights pulsed. "They know we're here," Elias said. "And they won't let you leave now." Drones descended from above, not military, but biomechanical, sleek and silent. They didn't attack. They hovered. Watching. Assessing. "They're here for you," Elias said grimly. "Not to kill you, to decide if you're still theirs." But the protagonist didn't run. He stepped forward and raised his hands. The drones paused. A soft vibration filled the room. Recognition. Somewhere inside their code he belonged. They didn't lower weapons, they retracted them. "They're waiting for your decision," Elias whispered. "Who you choose to be." The war wasn't external. It was identity. Allegiance. Purpose. And the protagonist now stood at the line between two worlds, neither fully his. The drones led them to a hidden chamber far beneath the surface. It wasn't built by humans. Smooth metallic walls pulsed like living tissue. At the center stood a device, a sphere hovering inches off the floor, rotating slowly, emitting faint chimes. "It's a seed," Elias said, breathless. "A memory archive. Not a weapon, a recorder." The protagonist approached, and it opened, revealing data in waves of light and sound. He saw cities rising and falling, species born and forgotten, civilizations wiped clean, not by war, but by erasure. They didn't conquer planets, they rewrote them. History was their battlefield. This is what they've done before, the protagonist realized. They erase resistance, then implant obedience. He turned to Elias. And they're doing it here. But now, he had something they never accounted for: conscious memory. Unfiltered, human, and awakening. They left the facility before the drones could change their minds. Back above ground, the forest was quiet, too quiet. The sky felt heavier. Elias drove them through backroads, silent, shaken. "Why you?" he asked finally. The protagonist didn't answer. He didn't know. Not fully. But deep inside, the answer echoed. He wasn't built to lead. He was built to remember, to hold truth in a form that couldn't be corrupted. Not data, not files, but experience. Emotion, not pay. The very thing the invaders couldn't simulate. His memories, his pain, his grief, his rage, they were real. And they were unerasable. That was Earth's weapon. Not firepower, but memory. Not resistance by force, but by remembrance. "We beat them," he said quietly, "by being human." And now, the countdown had begun. He felt it. The final choice was coming. The world outside had shifted. Not visibly, but in silence, beneath headlines, under systems. Something ancient had reawakened, and now the protagonist felt it inside him. He returned to the city, back where it began, walking through streets filled with digital illusions and half-truths. The government hadn't fallen. It had adapted. Entire narratives were rewritten in real time, shaping what people believed, not what had happened. And still, the people didn't fight. They forgot. The protagonist walked through a marketplace where smiling faces sold artificial serenity. "Nothing happened," one screen declared. "All is well." But it wasn't. Every lie was now another thread in a vast controlled memory network. The protagonist whispered, "We're not living, we're looping." Somewhere deep within him, the recorder device pulsed. It was time to break the cycle, not with war, but with revelation. Elias gathered the remaining members of the Remembered inside a decommissioned satellite station, now repurposed as a broadcasting hub. "This is it," he said. "If we transmit, we expose everything, but we also make ourselves target." The protagonist stood over the console, the memory key now interfacing with alien tech, unlocked by his very presence. "Once this begins, the world won't be able to pretend anymore," Elias warned. The protagonist looked at him. "Then it's time to stop pretending." With a breath, he inserted the key. A pulse surged through the equipment, ancient knowledge, raw memory, unfiltered truths now climbing through the data stream. Somewhere the sleeping minds would hear it. The ones still capable of remembering. This wasn't about turning everyone into fighters. It was about giving them a choice. Truth versus illusion. Memory versus manipulation. The transmission echoed across the world, not through sound waves but thought. Dreams shifted. Memories returned. People jolted awake in the middle of the night, whispering phrases they didn't know they knew. For some, it was terror. For others, freedom. But for those in power, it was chaos. Entire systems began to collapse under the weight of undeniable truth. The protagonist watched news anchors stutter, unable to follow teleprompters corrupted by alien symbols. Firewalls failed. Suppressed footage returned to public feeds. "They can't contain it," Elias said. "It's too late." But the protagonist knew the cost. This wasn't a victory, it was a fracture. The world wouldn't erupt into battle. It would fall into uncertainty. But maybe that was enough. He said quietly, "Now they have to choose." And that's something the invaders can't predict. The resistance had won nothing, but they had taken everything back. Not cities. Not resources. Memories. Free will. For the first time in years, people questioned. And that act alone shifted the balance of power. The protagonist stood on a rooftop, watching a skyline lit by confusion. Some believed they were under attack. Others believed they'd been saved. But belief itself had become a battlefield. Elias joined him, quiet. "This won't fix the world," he said. "No," the protagonist replied, "but it might wake it up." The invaders hadn't expected resistance from memory. They never believed humanity would weaponize its own trauma, its own questions. But it had. And now, the protagonist had one final decision left, one the rest of the world couldn't make for him. Stay silent, or tell the whole story. Truth wasn't safe. But it was theirs again. He uploaded the final message at midnight. No encryption. No mask. Just the raw, unfiltered memory of everything he'd seen, everything he was. The hybrid truth. The betrayal. The waking dreams. "I'm not who I was," he said in the broadcast. "None of us are. And that's the point." The signal wasn't a warning. It was a test. One that humanity had unknowingly passed by refusing to forget. The screen went black after his final words. "We don't need to fire a shot. We just need to remember who we are." Across the world, silence followed. But within it, awareness bloomed. And while governments scrambled and invaders recoiled, Earth shifted. It didn't scream. It didn't burn. It remembered. And in that memory, it found strength. The protagonist stepped away from the mic, eyes closed. He felt it again. Not the voice. Not the invasion. The quiet certainty of resistance. The message had been sent. The silence afterward was unbearable. No explosions. No fleets. No retaliation. Just stillness. Elias paced the bunker like a man expecting a sky to fall. "They should have answered by now," he muttered. The protagonist said nothing. He stood before the last remaining screen, watching its idle flicker. Then, without sound or signal, it turned black. The words appeared slowly. Acknowledged. No name. No threat. Just observation. "It worked," Elias whispered, not with relief, but disbelief. "They're, backing off." The protagonist stared into the blank screen. He didn't feel like a victor. He felt exposed. The war hadn't ended. It had been paused. Negotiated. He knew it wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. They had underestimated the power of memory, of consciousness. And now, Earth wasn't conquered, but catalogued. The invasion had failed not because humanity fought, but because it remembered. Around the world, subtle changes took root. Sky anomalies faded. Static interference disappeared. The hum stopped. Governments didn't declare victory, they declared maintenance. A minor global systems glitch, officials said. But the people weren't buying it. Something inside them had changed. The world felt older, deeper, like it had always been part of something far more vast than anyone admitted. In hidden forums, a symbol began to spread. The memory key. It wasn't a movement. It was a reminder. That remembering had power. The protagonist walked unnoticed through a crowd again. But this time, he didn't feel alone. Strangers nodded quietly. Eyes met and held meaning. The war had shifted into something permanent, not conflict, but awareness. And awareness, once sparked, couldn't be extinguished. Not by machines. Not by propaganda. Not by time. In the wake of peace, there came fracture. Some couldn't accept it. "We should have fought," one man shouted on a stream. Others demanded retribution, warning that inaction was submission. But the protagonist knew the truth. Fighting back physically would have given the invaders what they wanted, a justification for rewriting the planet entirely. By resisting with memory, humanity had exposed them, forcing a retreat from a game they no longer controlled. Elias gathered remnants of the remembered, now scattered, cautious. "It's not about resistance anymore," he said. "It's about stewardship." The protagonist agreed. They had inherited something ancient, not technology, but legacy. "They'll return. someone warned. Then we remember louder, the protagonist replied. Truth, it turned out, wasn't a moment. It was a ritual, a responsibility. And now Earth remembered in whispers, in symbols, in stories. The protagonist returned to the facility one last time. It had grown quiet, dormant but not dead. The alien tech had powered down. The drones were gone. Only echoes remained. He walked the halls alone, past old warnings and ancient walls. At the center chamber, the memory sphere hovered, dim now, almost asleep. He placed his palm against it, not to activate, but to connect. It pulsed once, then dimmed completely. No alarms. No transmissions. Just stillness. A final breath. We're done here, he whispered. The war had left no ruins. No banners. Just a shifted consciousness. Humanity had not triumphed. It had endured. And in doing so, it had rewritten its role. Not prey. Not pawn. Participant. Guardian. He turned his back on the machine and walked out into the world, not to hide, but to live. Later, he sat at the edge of a cliff, overlooking a valley reborn in green. No signals. No satellites. Just wind and wildness. In his hand was the memory key, now inert. Not destroyed. Just silent. Its work was done. They'll come again. Elias had told him. They always do. But next time, Earth would not be silent. It would not forget. The protagonist didn't know if he would live to see that day. It didn't matter. His memory had been passed on. In people. In stories. In quiet knowing. He watched the horizon shift with color as dawn approached. The first light didn't announce anything new. It illuminated what had always been there. Truth, waiting. He closed his eyes. And for once there was no voice. No hum. Just the sound of a world remembering how to be free. Weeks passed. And the world settled into something new. Not peace, not chaos, but awareness. People began to rebuild. Not structures, but trust. Families gathered without screens. Elders spoke again, and children listened. History, once rewritten by code, now passed mouth to mouth, story to story. The memory key wasn't needed anymore. It had done its job. The protagonist moved through small towns and remote enclaves where whispers of the remembered were blooming. No banners. No leaders. Just quiet rituals of remembering. They didn't call it resistance. They called it reclaiming. And as the protagonist walked among them, no one asked for his name. They simply nodded. They remembered him, not for what he had done, but for what he had preserved. The war's not over, someone said to him. Maybe not, he replied. But it's ours now. A new kind of communication began spreading. Not digital. Not encrypted. Organic. Symbolic. Carvings on stones. Murals on walls. Stories sewn into clothing. Symbols that once belonged to the invaders were redefined. No longer warnings, but lessons. Memory, once seen as a vulnerability, had become Earth's shield. And across deserts, mountaintops, forests and cities, signs of shared experience emerged. The protagonist visited a mural in a coastal town, a woman with outstretched arms, behind her a constellation of eyes. We see now, someone had written beneath it. He smiled faintly. The war had turned the planet into a living archive. Not perfect, not unified, but awake. And in that awakening, the invaders lost their most powerful weapon, control. Humanity had become too unpredictable, too beautifully flawed, too painfully aware. And that was its strength. Far above Earth, in the vacuum beyond orbit, something stirred. Not an attack, an observation. A listening post, alien in origin, rotated silently. It hadn't left. It had simply gone quiet. Within, data scrolled across alien monitors, documenting patterns, human unpredictability, memory resilience, emotional variance. Non-compliance logged, the machine noted. No correction recommended. Earth was no longer seen as salvageable, not because it was broken, but because it was resistant, unprogrammable, anomalous. The protagonist had never needed to destroy them. He had only needed to prove Earth couldn't be controlled. The invaders didn't retreat in fear. They retreated in frustration. There was nothing they could fix here. And so they watched. Still orbiting. Still calculating. But no longer in command. Back on Earth, the protagonist stood once more on the rooftop where it all began. The skyline had changed, not in structure, but in feeling. Quiet. Awake. He looked out over the city and didn't see chaos or fear anymore. He saw motion. Healing. A slow, imperfect reassembly. The truth was everywhere now, not just in databases but in people. In gestures. In glances. In stories whispered before sleep. His role was over. His burden wasn't. But it no longer crushed him. "We don't fight them by killing them," he said aloud. "We fight by staying human." A drone passed overhead. It didn't stop. It didn't scan. It just flew on. The world had changed. Not by war, but by remembering. He stepped away from the edge and into the stairwell. Somewhere, someone else was waking up to their truth. And that was enough. The final image is stillness. The protagonist walking down a narrow path through misty woods, no weapons, no tech, just a journal in his hands. "The truth has a price," he murmured to himself. Behind him, the trees close gently, like memory folding inward. Ahead, the fog thickens. But he keeps walking. Somewhere out there the future waits, not to be won, but to be remembered rightly. In the quiet, a final revelation. Earth was never alone. Not because of the invaders, but because of each other. Humanity's greatest power wasn't fire or fear. It was memory shared, passed on, held sacred. The protagonist disappears into the mist, leaving only footprints and an idea. This wasn't the end. It never was. Just a new chapter in a much older story. One that Earth was finally ready to write for itself.